What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we're going to be talking the must-own mid-round wide receivers for the 2022 fantasy football season. Basically, these are the guys that, on average, between rounds like 5 to 7 to 8, have huge upside that are readily available in that range, have high-end wide receiver 2 capabilities, can even break into the wide receiver 1 category. So definitely must know names. Make sure to tune into this breakdown. If you guys enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. Let us hear it in the comment section. Do you agree? Disagree? What other wide receivers would you put into this range? What are your favorite mid-round wide receiver targets? Along with any other questions you guys might have, we will do our best to answer them all. And lastly, make sure to check out the 2022 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide. It has everything you want at a great value. Rankings, projections, bios, tiers, along with general fantasy advice. All the details in the description. But with that being said, let's get into it. And as you can see, we have got our consensus ADPs pulled up here for the wide receiver position. Note, this is based on PPR scoring, so just keep that in mind. But without further ado, let's get into it. And like I said, this is all based on mid-round wide receivers. So, once you get to that 5th round range, I think that's kind of the sweet spot that we're talking about. And the reason I think this is so important to highlight is because, to me, that's some of the best values in fantasy football drafts this year. Like, if you want to go running back heavy in the first couple of rounds and, do more often than not the smart approach, pay attention to the most important position in fantasy football early on, the running back position. I want you guys to know that you have some really good wide receiver options in those middle rounds where you can still put together a very good roster and not be worried that you don't have like a Cooper Kupp or a Justin Jefferson, but you will be just fine. So let's kick it off here. We don't have specifically a set number of guys, just going to be talking my favorites. We start with Mike Williams of the LA Chargers. So he comes in as the 52nd overall player here. So again, depending on the size of your leagues, that'll translate to potentially the start of the 5th round if it's a little bit smaller, end of the 4th round, something like that. But Mike Williams is a guy for the Chargers. First and foremost, he finally had that huge breakout season last year. Yes, he is a little bit better suited for standard scoring formats. I'm not going to deny that. To me, the majority of the volume will still go through Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler on this offense. But Mike Williams proved himself to be a guy that the Chargers, first of all, want to keep, as evident by the big deal that he got. He's in an explosive offense in the most explosive division in all of football, with the Chargers, the Chiefs, the Broncos, and the Raiders. 6 times out of the year, that's going to be an absolute showdown, and I can't wait for fantasy purposes. But honestly, look, when healthy, Mike Williams, there were points last year when he was out-targeting Keenan Allen. Like, he was getting, as crazy as it might sound, more receptions, more yards than Keenan Allen. He kind of did, fade away a little bit towards the end of the season, but I do think there were some, nagging injuries there. Right now, I like Mike Williams. I don't think the gap between him and Keenan Allen should be all that large. Honestly, Keenan Allen going in the end of the 2nd, early 3rd round in drafts, Mike Williams shouldn't be going, 2-3 rounds afterwards. I think the gap should be much smaller. Justin Herbert is a type of quarterback. He's proven it year 1, year 2. He's in that top-notch category of quarterbacks, and he can sustain multiple fantasy-relevant wide receivers. Williams has very high touchdown upside, which you like to see. Again, would be higher in standard formats, but look, if you get Mike Williams as your wide receiver 2, something like that, I'd be very happy about that situation. Again, to me, he is a guy that on a great offense, he checks all the boxes, honestly, he does. And I would definitely be taking a chance on him this season. To me, the gap between him and Keenan Allen shouldn't be nearly as large. Next, let's continue on with a guy in Chris Godwin that I think is very intriguing. I wanted to put him on this list, part speculation, part because, to draw attention to his name. First and foremost, obviously the big thing for him is coming off his ACL injury. Is he going to be ready for the start of the season? Or is he going to be on the PUP list? Now, I've said it before, Chris Godwin is a guy that I believe in a lot in terms of talent. I think in PPR formats, he's the best wide receiver that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have to offer. I'm not worried about the addition of Julio Jones. I'm not worried about the addition of Russell Gage when it comes to the top two alphas on this team, that being Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. The one thing is, what's driving this potential value for Chris Godwin is the fact that he's coming off a late season ACL, and that can be worrisome. It definitely can be. But this is how I would treat the situation, basically. If Chris Godwin isn't put on the PUP list, I think that he's a decent flyer at this point in time. Again, he comes into the 54th overall spot. He's intriguing. I think when it's Godwin and Mike Evans together on the field, I'd rather have Godwin. Again, that's presuming 100% health. So that'll be the asterisk next to this inclusion. But if Godwin doesn't start the season on the PUP list, you'd have to believe that the Buccaneers have faith in him being healthy enough to play and to hold up for the majority of the season. And in those scenarios, I would definitely take a chance on a guy that was being drafted, in the early third round last season. Now, afterwards, we go to a guy here in Marquis Brown, comes in at the 64th spot overall in terms of players. Again, that's going to transition to like 6th round ADP, something like that. I don't understand this. I really, really don't. I think he should be much higher on this list. I mean, he was putting up wide receiver 1 numbers last season at the beginning of the year when Lamar Jackson was healthy. Now he's going on a much higher, pass-heavy type of offense with a better passer in Kyler Murray. And DeAndre Hopkins is suspended for the first 6 games of the season. Now, yes, Marquise Brown was dealing with a little bit of a hamstring issue to kick off, training camp, but that's since kind of passed. The last thing that kind of happened, he got in trouble for speeding. I don't think that's going to lead to a suspension or anything like that. To me, Marquise Brown for the first 6 weeks of the season is going to be the wide receiver 1 for Kyler Murray and for the Cardinals. High scoring offense. I think he can duplicate being the wide receiver 1 that he was in Baltimore last year and do that here. The only reason he dropped off in 2021 was because Lamar Jackson got hurt. And I mean, the Cardinals did give up a first-round selection for Marquise Brown. They definitely believe in him. And, if you're worried about Marquise Brown, you do have the option of moving him once it gets closer to DeAndre Hopkins returning, for what it's worth. But I think for the first 6 weeks of the season, even afterwards, that chemistry is going to be there. Marquise Brown, to kick it off, he's going to be a wide receiver 1, and then at worst case scenario, mid to high end wide receiver 2. That's why he's so intriguing. Next up, we go to Darnell Mooney of the Chicago Bears. And again, obviously, a lot of these guys are going to fit in different spots depending on the platform you're drafting on. But that's why we're looking at the consensus overall rankings, kind of where, on average they fit. Comes in at the number 69 overall spot. And by the way, I'm not saying that this is where I would rank these guys, but they do fit in this middle round of criteria. So far, out of the names that we've mentioned, we haven't even gotten the guy that I have ranked the highest out of all these mid-level wide receivers, but that's coming up, don't worry. With Darnell Mooney, though, getting back to him, it's all about the volume. And last season, he was able to get it done even while Allen Robinson was on the field, but he had his fair share of issues, Robinson that is, with the Chicago Bears, so I kind of give him a pass. Justin Fields was able to find and feed Darnell Mooney. Now he's going to be the unquestioned number 1 guy for the Chicago Bears. It'll be interesting to see what happens when there's not an Allen Robinson opposite him to take away some coverages, but I think the volume will be enough to save him. I think he can be, again, a high-end wide receiver 2. Somebody that just benefits from a ton of opportunities. Look, the Bears are not a good football team. They're going to be down. They're going to be down often. And that means they're going to have to throw the football. Darnell Mooney is by far the top option that the Chicago Bears have. Yes, there's other guys like Cole Kmet, like David Montgomery, but Mooney at the wide receiver position is the top dog. And I think, at least from a floor perspective, his floor is relatively high. Even if Justin Fields struggles, I don't know how Darnell Mooney doesn't see close to double-digit targets every single week when you take into account just the Bears, the state that they are in. And again, the fact they're probably going to be down the majority of times, and Justin Fields is going to be forced to throw the football. Again, this goes back to the whole idea of you can have good fantasy relevant players on plain old bad NFL real life teams. I think that's exactly where we're looking at here with Darnell Mooney. So a guy that, again, I do like. Next up, we've got Allen Robinson. I have been talking him up since I feel like, all year long. He is my guy that I continue to say, Robinson, 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 take him no matter. I'd be okay taking Allen Robinson in the freaking third round of drafts. He's ranked here 71st overall. That's how much I believe in him. I'd be okay having him as my wide receiver one. He's playing with the best quarterback that he has in his entire career, Matthew Stafford, playing opposite Cooper Kupp. Going to open up so many things for him. It's basically a Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp situation from last season where people were selecting Robert Woods ahead of Cooper Kupp. If people, it happened a year ago, but that was a fact. And the separation between those two guys was like half a round, something like that. Now, I'm not saying Allen Robinson is going to finish as the number one overall wide receiver in fantasy football, but I do think the gap between him and Cooper Kupp is going to be much lower than people want to admit. And the fact that you can get him in the 6th round is absolutely bananas. Now, the one thing that has to be mentioned here that's kind of been lingering, that's been out there, is the elbow injury for Matthew Stafford. Hasn't really, done too much throwing so far heading into training camp, been limited. And there's been reports, maybe the Rams try and do their homework on a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo to ensure themselves if something happens with Matthew Stafford and that elbow. And honestly, that's probably going to be the main thing that drives down guys like Allen Robinson, like Cooper Kupp potentially for their projections. But I totally understand that from that perspective. I still think Allen Robinson would be a good value then. But look, if Matthew Stafford plays the entirety of the season, I don't see how Allen Robinson isn't knocking on the door of a top 15 year. The guy put up top 15, production with schmucks like Bortles and Mitch Trubisky. So that really tells you all you need to know from that perspective. I'm all in on Allen Robinson. Unless something happens with Matthew Stafford, which hopefully isn't the case, Robinson should be in for a huge, huge bounce back season. Next up, we go to one Hunter Renfrow, a guy that I've kind of been, changing my stance on a little bit. Initially, I thought, okay, he's definitely going to have a regression type of year, and I still believe that. I do think he will regress. But why I'm getting kind of back on board with Hunter Renfrow, it's just because of how much I believe in Derek Carr. I think Derek Carr is going to have a top 5 season in terms of passing yardage. And yes, Devontae Adams will eat. And yes, Darren Waller will eat. But I think there will also be opportunities for Hunter Renfrow. And if you can get him as your wide receiver 3, which again, 75th overall, it's kind of shaping up to be that 7th round ADP, even sometimes later on, I would be pulling the trigger on that. He's definitely very talented. The Raiders locked him up. And if something were to happen to Devontae Adams, Renfrow is in the wide receiver 1 category, similar to what we saw last season. Next up, I want to touch on one Juju Smith-Schuster. He is a guy that I, again, am really, really warming up to heading closer to September. And it boils down to this. Look, Juju Smith-Schuster, the last couple of seasons, he's been nicked up. He hasn't been healthy. And he's been playing with a Big Ben that's been severely declining. Now he's playing with the best quarterback that he's ever had in his entire, career. I'm not saying Big Ben isn't great, but where Patrick Mahomes is now versus, what Big Ben was before, I'd rather take Patrick Mahomes. Tyreek Hill isn't there, so Juju Smith-Schuster is going to get a lot of those targets. Now, he's not going to be the Tyreek Hill replacement. I mean, I still think Travis Kelce will be the number 1 option on this offense, but Schuster is by far and away the top wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs in terms of experience, in terms of talent, et cetera, et cetera. So, and he's playing to opposite a true alpha in Travis Kelce. So, for all those people that, maybe were worried and to some extent proven right, what happens if Juju Smith-Schuster doesn't have an Antonio Brown opposite him? Well, now he's got his version of, Antonio Brown, if you will, and Travis Kelce. And I think Schuster is going to return to that type of production that we saw from him before. Definitely a guy, and again, another explosive offense. 86th overall. I think he has got, wide receiver one upside. People really aren't talking about him enough. I think it's more so because, you know, his replacement he's replacing Tyreek Hill. So it's like, okay, well, obviously he's not going to be Tyreek Hill, but even if he's a portion of that, I think he can still be very, very good for fantasy football purposes. And then finally, let's wrap it up here with one Rashad Bateman. Comes in at the 92nd overall spot. Again, probably in the 7th, 8th round range, depending on the size of your leagues. I don't want to go too much lower than this because then, we're kind of getting into double-digit rounds a little bit later on. And we're more so focusing here on the middle rounds where you can get some really, really good value. And I think Rashad Bateman definitely fits the bill. No more Marquis Brown. Bateman was a wide receiver last year as a rookie that I was, after Jamar Chase, he was the next highest ranked rookie wide receiver on my list. And I know that was the case for a lot of other fantasy analysts as well. Unfortunately, due to his injuries, due to the Lamar Jackson injuries, he never really got a fair opportunity to show what he could do fully in his rookie season. Now, with a healthy Lamar Jackson, with Marquise Brown removed, Rashad Bateman is the unquestioned number one wide receiver on the team. He's still got a Mark Andrews opposite him to take away some, defenses, things like that. I think Bateman could have a nice high-end wide receiver 2 type of production. I'm definitely be okay trotting him out, as my wide receiver 2. And depending on his ADP here, you could definitely even grab him like as a flex, as a bench guy. And then if he breaks out, kind of insert him into your starting lineup. I see the potential there, a bigger target, a little bit more physical than like a Marquise Brown. So I really, really like Rashad Bateman. I think he fits, the bill of what type of pass Lamar Jackson is a little bit better. So I definitely expect a second-year breakout here for Rashad Bateman. And he's somebody that I am targeting absolutely in all of my middle round of drafts. So I'm looking for a wide receiver. But with that, we wrap up this breakdown of the must-own mid-round wide receivers for the 2022 fantasy football season. Let me know your thoughts. Did you agree, disagree? What other mid-round wide receivers are you targeting in your drafts, along with any other questions you guys might have? I'll do my best to answer them all. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. And lastly, make sure to check out the 2022 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide. It has everything you could want at a great, great value. Details in the description. And in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.